Porter Cable A2 belt sander, which I dearly love. I use it for wood, I use it for metal. It's a little tiny 2-inch belt. But it's sure handy. I rebuilt this thing some years ago. 2-inch belts are hard to get, so I buy 3-inch belts and just cut them down with a pair of scissors. And I want to make a box for it because I've been keeping it in this plastic thingy for far too long. So it's going to get a sheet metal box. And I'm going to do this project such that everything I do, everything I buy, is going to be from my local hardware store. So no special tools, no welding, no special material, just whatever I can get from a local hardware store, and I'm going to make a box for it. Granted, that's not the most cost-effective way to do things, but it does prove that you can do a lot with just the stuff around you in a lot simpler ways than you might think. So the hardware store sourced toolbox. Okay, so as you can see, it fits neatly into this little plastic tub, or whatever you want to call it, with room for spare belts, plenty of room for the cord. You know, it's not flopping around. It's a nice size. So I'm going to basically mimic this size. So it is, let's call it 14 inches by 8. And then the highest point is where the cord sticks up back here, and that's 7 inches. So 14 by 8 by 7. Architecturally, we're going to copy this old Milwaukee Sawzall box that I have. So some details. It's got 2 snaps on it. It has a piano hinge. I may or may not use a piano hinge. I might use flap hinges. It has a handle mounted on top. It has a setback to engage the lid. And it's got features that hold the tool in place and features that hold accessories, the cord, blades, and so forth. It's got exposed joints, so simple sheet metal folds that are, in this case, welded to the side panels. Inspiration. It's my old Kennedy machinist tool chest. 2 things to notice about this that we'll be copying. One is very sharp square corners on the top, and the side panels overlay the front and the top of the box. Unlike the Milwaukee, where the seams were around the side, the Kennedy has them on the top and front. So between the size and shape and proportions of the Milwaukee and the seam and the joint design of the Kennedy, we're going to come up with our own little thing. Keeping to the hardware store promise, to do all the steel cutting, I'm going to use a circular saw fitted with a metal cutting blade. And this is a carbide tipped circular saw blade. They rip right through steel, no problem. They cut better than the old-fashioned carborundum cutoff wheels. They don't heat the metal up. They don't throw sparks. But what they do is they throw chips. So they throw little shards of steel all over the place. So this is an operation where one of these is required. Hearing protection is required. It's quite loud. And I wear my fashionable blue denim coveralls, but snapped right up to the neck, because you're going to get bombarded with little chips of steel. Little chips of steel, and they are everywhere, so suit up. Before going any further, I'm going to just take my hardware store file and just knock some of the burrs off the edge. Just to make it a little less likely to cut myself. Okay, now's a good time to heed Fitzy's admonition, and before we start shaping the metal, sand it. So this is hot rolled, or sorry, cold rolled, so it's got a pretty nice finish on it, but I'm still gonna give it a going over with 60 grit so that when it's all folded up, the interior is already sanded and ready for paint. So I'm gonna okay, and I'm going to hit it with some 120. A word about the cutting. So before I made that cut, I spent a lot of time making sure that this sheet was square on all four corners. I used my old antique beat up carpenter square, and I did the diagonal measurements with my little antique old Lufkin tape measure. I checked it like 3 or 4 times, make sure it's square, square, square. That's really important going forward when we start folding up the sheet metal. When we start making bends, if it ain't square, you're gonna have a mess on your hands. As soon as you start making the seams and making the folds, you got one little thing out of square, it's gonna multiply and multiply, and you're gonna have a mess and end up having to start over. So make sure your cut is square. For our first forming operation, if we look at our exemplar here, we have to make this little hem, or this little back set right here, for the lid to engage when it closes. So we're going to fold that into the top of the front piece and the top of the side pieces, here and here. Make our bends. This is 16 gauge. This is not kid stuff. This is, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna scribe. So this is 22 gauge. So this is easy to bend. You can almost fold it with your hands. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna scribe a line with our circular saw at our cut marks. So the 3/4 inch right here is the lap joint. And we're going to cut it so that the remaining sheet metal is 22 gauge thickness. Step 1 is I put a 6.5 inch blade on my 7 inch skill saw so that I can lower the cut down without cutting all the way through the sheet metal, because a 7 inch blade, 7.25 inch blade will cut all the way through the bottom of the table. And then I just adjust the height of the blade so that it turns on the metal, like so, but won't turn when it's hanging off the edge of the metal. Like right now it's above the wood. So it's not turning. So that'll scribe the 16 gauge, but not all the way through. Okay, there's our scribed line. It's about halfway through, and notice I've been using a straight edge, and I do a lot of setup. I double, triple check these measurements, make sure they're all straight, square, and in the right place. Okay, step one of making the folds, I put a piece of angle iron over the edge of my bench. And I'm going to take the inner scribe line. This is the inside of the box. And I'm going to put the scribe line dead above the edge of the angle iron. And then I'm going to take a piece of 1/4-inch strap and lay it over that and make sure that the strap is dead above the angle iron. And make sure the scribe is dead above the angle iron. I'm going to take a little time and get that all lined up and clamped up. Okay, she's all clamped up. I'm going to take a piece of this mending plate, which again I got from the hardware store, and I'm going to lay it right next to the 1/4-inch angle, or the 1/4-inch strap. And then I'm going to take a little hammer and bangity bang, get the bend going on the scribe line under the plate here. Okay, now I've taken it out of the clamps, and I'm just going to finish it with a little bit of plywood and a little bit of a bigger persuader. I'm going to set it up one more time with the angle iron, except now I'm going to put the 1/4 strap on the inside and get that all clamped up. Okay. All right, same kind of operation. Angle bar is in and clamped down. Strap is in and clamped down. Mending plate. Persuader. Now I'm going to fold it this way. Fold that this way over the angle iron. Just a little at a time, just get it going. Don't try to do it all at once. Okay, once you got it moving, time for the plywood and the Bell telephone persuader. Again, just a little at a time. Okay, there it is. I just tuned out the edge a little bit with the body hammer. Took out some of a little bit of high spots, a little bit of waviness that happened here, which was very slight. But there you go. I mean, that almost looks as good as you could have done with a brake or a bead roller. Now, when we get to assembling the box, I'm gonna come back to this joint a little bit later. But for now, she's formed. And you can see where the top, the lid will come down and go over the lap joint and create a nice shadow line. Believe it or not, that's the hardest part. The rest of this is easy. Now, I did say I wasn't going to weld on this project, but I did not say I wasn't going to solder. So I'm going to solder the seams that we scribed for these joggle joints, and then take my Dremel. I'm going to clean it out. Take some acetone. I take some liquid flux. Run it in the scribe mark. Once the solder's in and still hot, strike it with a piece of steel just to neaten up the joint. As soon as it cools down with a touch, you need to clean the flux off, because this solder flux is very caustic and it'll rust the metal overnight. You'll come back tomorrow and this will just be rusted. So a little bit of isopropyl and a clean rag, and clean off that solder flux. There's the outside joggle joint, all all sanded and smoothed out. And let me tell you, soldering sounds wimpy. You know, it's not welding, but let me tell you, it's pretty damn strong. Got the side panels cut and scribed. Scribed on the inside, scribed on the outside for the joggle joint. But before we fold them, we need to cut out the corners. Doing that with the mini grinder. Now these end plates are going to mount on the outside of the box. So these folds are going to be visible on the outside of the box. So this is the outside of the side panel. So now is the time to get a little decorative if you want, and dress up the corners so that when they are folded and they show on the outside, you have a little bit of a visual feature. So I'm just going to put a little angle on them. I'm going to do that with the angle grinder, like so. Okay, there they are, angled a little bit. Now these are going to be folded, so now is the time to dress up these edges and corners and make everything look nice. So I'm just going to do that with my Porter Cable random orbital sander and a piece of 60 grit, and just knock burrs off and round the corners off and dress them up a little bit. Now everything is nice and smooth, no burrs, no sharp edges, nice and smooth. Okay, joggle joints are in the side panels. So now we're going to start folding up the edges to make the corner joints. On these ones, we're going to bang it up instead of down. So I align the seam so she's dead over the angle iron, and the strap is dead over the angle iron, and I can see the scribe mark. And I'm going to take the hammer and bang it up. So in some of the other videos, you may have seen my little hobby vise here. You might be wondering, what are you doing with that toy? Well, I'll show you what. So here's the side panel, and I just got the edge started. You can see just a little bit of a fold in it with the hammer. I'm going to take it, just open the jaws a little bit, slide this in, and then gently start folding her over. There it is, one nicely folded piece of 16 gauge. Obviously that's been a lot faster with a brake, but if you don't have a brake, this is one way to do it. There you go. Some guys have a fancy finger brake. I got a cheap little hobby vise. And I got the end of a toolbox. I got two of them. Okay, getting ready to mark the main box panel. That's the front, the bottom, and the back for scribing. I've got the side panels marked up. I folded over the joggle joint a little bit. This will go on the inside. This will go on the outside. Marked them for front. And now I'm just going to align the bottom of the joggle joints all the way around. Tops are a little bit out of line, but that's okay. We'll take care of that later. Just get the bottoms of the joggle joints aligned. And then I'm going to take my handy dandy little body hammer here and just gently tap them in. Now, this sheet needs to fold inside of the bottom flanges. So I'm going to mark the inside of the bottom flanges with a little bit of a fatter pen. I'll take these off. And the scribe has to be dead between those two. For scribing this fold, I'm going to use a method favored by Div and Fitzy and several other people. I'm going to use the mini grinder and a piece of strap to guide the edge of the mini grinder along my line. And there it is. So you might ask, why did I change methods? Well, I wanted to show you two methods, the circular saw and the body grinder. The body grinder is a little easier to control because you mark your line and you cut right on your mark. With a circular saw, you got to judge an offset, which is not a big deal, but sometimes you get, at least I get in the heat of the project, and I kind of screw up the measurements and end up making 2 or 3 cuts before I get it right. The mini grinder, you're cutting right on your mark, so it makes it easier. Plus, the mini grinder makes a U-shaped cut, whereas the circular saw makes a square bottom cut. This is a little more friendly for soldering. It doesn't create a little burr on the edge. You don't have a little solder dam there. It just finishes off nicer. So I resisted mini grinders for years, but I got to admit they work pretty good. Now I have this clamped under the angle iron backwards with the long piece facing me because I need the leverage of this rest of this panel to make the bend. Okay, there's the front. Now we got to mark the back, scribe it, and bend it up. Same method. Okay, let's look back at our exemplar here. If we look at the back, you can see the back panel is cut lower than the front. So the front comes all the way up to here, but the back stops here at the bottom of the piano hinge. And the top of the piano hinge is aligned to the top of the roll on the side. So that means on our box, there's our piano hinge, which came from the same hardware store as the steel and the solder and everything else. I'm gonna have to cut this back panel to be at the same height as that fold on the front panel, as the joggle on the front panel. Okay, there's the box. All assembled, hinges on. Everything's all in one piece. So now I'm gonna take it apart, clean, 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 and solder it all together. I'll tighten up some of these joints with a hammer and a dolly. I'm gonna make sure it's square and straight and solder it all together. Okay, there it is. It's sweat like sweating pipe. Looks a little sloppy right now, but don't worry, we'll clean it up. That's on my setup here. I got it sitting vertically with the joint facing up. So I have it sitting on a little aluminum bracket that I found someplace. And I got gravity working for me. So everything is going downhill. So makes the soldering a lot easier. Well, there it is in its unsightliness. So now we're going to clean this up, and we're going to take advantage of the fact that it's 16 gauge by using a flap wheel. So, and neaten up all these joints, clean off some of the heat marks, get her all dolled up. There we go. There's the bottom of the box, all finished up and joints all tooled up. Okay, and I beveled these edges to make them look nice. Okay, but I'm gonna stop here on this one because I went to the hardware store earlier today, and I was right. They're buying weathering steel. So weathering steel develops like this little frost of rust on it, and then it stops rusting. They put manganese in it, some other stuff to make it do that. And it's for outdoor use, which is all good. But what it means is when you sand it like this and you knock off the factory finish, it'll develop that frosty rust very quickly. So I'm not gonna put too much more time into metal finishing this. I'm gonna build the lid and the interior components, and then I'll clean up the heat marks and the frosty rust and all of the other things before doing a final paint job. So that'll do it for this episode, and part 2 is going to be the lid. See you then.